We now come to the motion on the British house building industry. Siobhan McDonough to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by thanking the Backbench Committee for granting this time for today's debate and for all those members who choose to participate. It is amazing to see so many members here, given the week that we've had. At the request of the Madam Deputy Speaker, I had to strip quite a lot out of this speech because there are so many people who want to speak, so I will really do my best. But I do want to be able to give credit and the best exposition of the amazing facts that the High Pay Unit have researched for this debate about the state of the house building industry. Because no member of this House cannot be fully aware, whatever party, just what a crisis there is in housing, homelessness and the needs of all our constituents. I'd like to use my time today by opening the debate looking at the scale of the current housing crisis, considering the record of the FTSE 350 house building companies and their contribution to solving this crisis, and finally, and I think most amazingly, by analysing the utter inequality in pay that is rife across the British house building industry. But at first, the housing crisis. On streets across our country and the very doorstep of this Parliament are British citizens sleeping rough who simply cannot afford a place to call home. For the general public, they are visually represented by our homelessness crisis. But as highlighted last month by the Children's Commissioner, homelessness in 21st century Britain is far more common, because not a single week goes by without a normal, hard-working family in my constituency being evicted from their privately rented property and sent to temporary accommodation miles away from their family, their schools, their jobs. They join over 83,700 households across our country, including 124,000 children who are living in temporary accommodation, costing the
picture she's painting into her research by telling her that Enfield has significant problems around housing and homelessness. We have the highest eviction rate in the capital, the second highest number of residents in temporary accommodation in London, and homelessness has rocketed by 250% since 2011. Does she agree with me? And I think from what she's saying, she clearly does. The government's policy isn't just hurting the housing market, but it's causing a huge set of social problems as well.
The social and financial cost of homelessness and temporary accommodation far exceeds what we spend on temporary accommodation, which last year was £1 billion of taxpayers' money, every pound of it badly spent. 6,980 families are trapped in B&Bs, including 810 children who've been there longer for the 6-week legal limit. Others are stuck in hostels, far away from their school, families and friends. Others still are my constituents, at least temporarily housed in Connect House, a warehouse in the busiest South London industrial estate. For anybody who wants to see what Connect House looks like, please have a look at the video on my Twitter site. I'm just crawling through this speech because I'm seeing more and more people here. Other families who come to see me are on the ever-expanding waiting list, with 1.2 million families across our country now waiting for a place to call home. 1.2 million. Just 6,464 new social homes were built in 2017-18, the second lowest on record. At that rate, it could take 172 years to give everyone on the current waiting list a socially rented home. That is utterly appalling when you compare it to the 150,000 social homes being delivered each year in the mid-1960s, or the 203,000 council homes delivered by the government in 1953. It has been done before, and we all know that we can do it again. In Merton, where my constituency is based, there are 10,000 families alone who are queuing on the local housing waiting list, despite lettings for just 2.5% of them in 2018-19. Madam Deputy Speaker, what hope can I give to the other 97.5% of these families that they will ever find a place to go? I would like to give you the statistics on home ownership, but again, I'd like to move on with some of the other data in my speech. The statistics and the stories I've detailed this afternoon should, in theory, provide thoroughly fertile ground for the British house building industry to get on and build. But I'm afraid that their record does not quite match this potential. Here's the reality. Our country's housing target is 300,000 new homes per year, a figure that hasn't been reached, as we've already identified, since 1969, back when councils and housing associations were building new homes. That means that England is now on course for the worst decade for house building since the Second World War. But I'd like to take a specific look at the performances of the leading house building companies across our country. Madam Deputy Speaker, to the best of my understanding, these figures are all correct as of June this year. In the last financial year, just 86,685 homes were completed by the 10 FTSE 350 house building companies, despite an extraordinary collective pre-tax profit of over £5.37 billion. This is a mind-boggling figure that is better understood broken down. So let's start with the 4 FTSE 100 housing companies: Barratt, Persimmon, Taylor Wimpey and Berkeley. In their most recent financial year, Barratt completed just 17,579 homes, slightly more than Persimmon, who finished 16,449 homes, with profits of £1.1 billion, half down to public subsidy through the government's Help to Buy scheme. Taylor Wimpey came third with 15,275 homes completed, but in fourth place, despite an astonishing pre-tax profit of £934.9 million, is Berkeley Homes, who completed a pitiful 3,894 homes in their last financial year. Together, these 4 companies collected a pre-tax profit of an unimaginable £3.68 billion, despite completing just 53,198 homes, less than 18% of the government's house building target. So what went wrong? Perhaps they just didn't have the land to build the houses. These 4 companies are currently sitting on a land bank of over 300,000 plots between them. Add in the rest of the FTSE 350 house building companies: Bellway, Bovis, Countryside, Crest Nicholson, Galliford Sears and Redrow, and their collective current land bank is a simply staggering 470,068 plots, and yet they completed 86,685 homes between them.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for giving way and congratulate her on making an excellent speech, which I broadly agree with. But would she not agree that we obviously need to build more houses from a moral point of view, both public and private sector, but we need to radically reform the planning system, which takes far too long and actually a big roadblock to actually getting the houses and the homes we need for people?
Can I absolutely agree with the honourable member and say that I would love an opportunity to have a debate about planning law, building on the green belt and other things, and I could speak at great length, but I won't, because I want to allow other people to get in at this point. But what I would really like just the attention of members on now is the issue of pay. Some of these figures are staggering. Let me be clear, I am New Labour to the core. I have no problem with successful business people earning a lot of money. But what happens here is beyond. beyond earning a fair day's money. I was just furious to see that almost exclusively on the back of the British taxpayer through Help to Buy, Persimmon awarded their former chief executive, Jeff Fairbairn, a staggering £75 million bonus, despite an appalling record of utterly substandard homes. How can that be right or fair?
Will she give way?
Of course.
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend for giving way. It's a truly staggering pay packet, and given that Persimmon have recently in Cardiff given back the freeholds that they missold to a number of homeowners there, don't you think they should do that for everyone that they've done that to in the whole country?
I would completely agree with my honourable friend and congratulate him on all the work he's been doing. That I'm sure without the attention that he's given it, even that would not have happened. But let's be clear, the money does not flow through the companies. Thanks to excellent new research from the High Pay Centre, I can reveal in the House today the quite extraordinary pay practice of the 10 FTSE 350 house building companies. In the heart of our country's housing crisis, the 4 FTSE 100 house building companies spent an eye-watering £53.2 million on their CEO pay. David Thomas at Barratt earned £2.811 million. Peter Redfern of Taylor Wimpey took home £3.152 million. Tony Pidgley at Berkeley reached £8.256. But back to Mr Fairbairn, formerly of Persimmon, he got a whopping £38.9 million.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, great speech. I totally endorse everything you said. I'm really worried as to what the heck are the shareholders doing when they have the AGM? Don't they question this? Because they are meant to keep the companies, bring the companies to account on such matters.
I'd like to thank the honourable member. Actually, the shareholders are doing quite well as well, because they're getting quite a lot of money on the back of Help to Buy, and that could be the subject of another debate. I have no doubt that these 4 men work hard, and I have no doubt that they have a grasp and understanding of their industry and that few others could provide. But surely high pay is supposed to be about high productivity, high quality of product. Yet it seems to me that the more substandard the properties that they build and the lower their rate of productivity, the more they seem to get paid. There seems to be no consequence for poor performance. We are in a housing crisis. It is really appropriate to find such preposterous pay packets, considering the house building record that I have described today.
I agree with almost everything she has said. I just feel I ought to point out, and I declare an interest because I spent as part of an Industry and Parliament Trust Fellowship a day at Berkeley Homes. The main shareholder of Berkeley Homes is Tony Pidgley. He started that business himself. He left school at 15, unable to read and write, and he has employed thousands of people and created a great deal of wealth for this country and paid a huge amount of tax. And moreover, he would deny, and he'd be right to do so, that Berkeley Homes, unlike some of the others she rightly mentioned, produce poor quality. They don't. They produce extremely good quality. They refuse to be members of the Home Builders Federation because they don't consider themselves a volume house builder.
I certainly would agree in part with the honourable member. I have had the honour of meeting Mr Pidgley, and I give him credit for his career and his actions, and his profits don't stem from Help to Buy. But even so, it does seem like a very unequal company. I have no problem with people earning well at the top, but I think people at the bottom shouldn't earn badly.
If I could just add to that point, and she's making I congratulate my honourable friend for making an excellent speech and bringing this debate forward. But I just want to add to that last point, in that, as far as I understand, Berkeley Group constructed no affordable housing last year. And then when you look at Barratt Homes or Persimmon or all the other top 4, the figures are like 18%, 20%. It is a complete scam. The amount of money they're taking out of the top for not just executive pay or shareholder pay, and I've got no problems with shareholders receiving dividends and so on, but this is at the expense of much needed social and affordable housing. The whole viability element within the planning system is a complete scam and should be done away with.
Can I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and I know that he works really hard on that, and just like the issues about the whole planning system, that could be the topic of another debate that I'm sure we both want to contribute in. The median pay for FTSE 100 house building CEOs is 228 times that of the typical UK construction worker. 228 times.
Well, for giving way. Would you agree with me that one way forward would be to increase the opportunities for self-build? It's incredibly difficult at the moment that if an individual wants to buy a plot of land and find a builder to construct a house for them, that they find so many obstacles in their way. Does she not agree with me that that may be a way forward of actually improving the situation we have at the moment?
Can I say, I think he has stolen the words from another of his honourable friends who does loads of work on self-build. There is also the issue of small and medium-sized builders who've been squeezed out, which unfortunately, again, I don't have time to address today. We're back to the pay differentials. At Barratt, the pay differential between the median of the is a disappointing 113 to 1. At Taylor Wimpey, it's an awful 126 to 1. At Berkeley, it is a shocking 333 to 1. But at Persimmon, it's an absolutely deplorable 1,561 to 1. Whilst Jeff Fernburn, in his final year of employment as Chief Executive of Persimmon, received over £38.9 million, yet his average member of staff earned £37,118. And they were for technical staff. We don't know what their subcontracted electricians, roofers, or any other wet trade kind of person might have received. How can that be fair? But the vast scale of inequality looks even worse in light of UK housing prices. Assuming the average UK house price is $230,630, and can I assure you couldn't buy anything in my constituency for that, or the honourable ladies from Enfield North, and that the average UK construction worker saves 10% of their earnings for buying a house, it would take them 92 years to save up, and 19 years just to save for the deposit alone. But the average FTSE 350 CEO could buy 28 houses outright in 1 year, 532 houses over 19 years that the construction worker would be using to build a deposit, and 2,567 houses over the 92 years that they are saving up to afford their home. On no level can this be right or fair. Can't be right for our society, it can't be right for us as taxpayers, it is simply wrong. The system is broken. The market does not, in the main, reward hard work, endeavour and meeting the housing that we need. And in my view, it certainly should do.
Well spoken.
Just before we begin the main part of the debate, it will be obvious that we have very little time left, not surprising in current circumstances, and lots of people want to speak. We'll try to manage without a time limit, see if we can be courteous and consensual, in which case, if everyone takes around 5 minutes, then we'll get there. Richard Bacon.
Speaker, that's very helpful. Can I start by congratulating the Honourable Lady very, very sincerely. I realised how strange times are in this particular debate area of housing when I attended a lunch at the Institute of Economic Affairs where the Honourable Lady was the guest speaker. And you realise how much not so much political cross-dressing is going on as searching for solutions outside traditional parameters is going on, because as the title of the white paper from January 2017 said, we have a broken housing market. We might have some differences about the causes of the situation she describes accurately, and we might have some differences about what are the best prescriptions for solving it, but what is absolutely clear is that supply does not rise to meet demand. She used the word market in her last couple of sentences of her speech, and that does rather imply that we have a market for housing. We have no such thing. We have a very tightly controlled oligopoly, and actually the supply doesn't rise to meet demand because most suppliers don't wish to damage their own profit margins by oversupplying the market so that prices fall. We wouldn't expect that in any other area of business, and we shouldn't expect it in housing either. What we need to do fundamentally is change the model. If we have a broken housing market, we need to create a different ecosystem. And the fundamental things we need to do are, one, increase choice for consumers. After all, it's the single biggest thing that people spend money on, by far. And yet it's the thing over which they have, whether renting or buying, it's the thing which they spend most of their annual income on, their monthly income, more than anything else. And it's the thing over which they have the least choice. In any ecosystem in which the consumer had any say, they would have the most choice. So we have to increase choice. We also have to lower barriers to entry. And that is where I want to bring in my favourite subject, mentioned by my honourable friend who's now no longer in his place, namely self-build and custom house building. Not, yes, of course.
Choice, and I totally agree with the point he's making, that one of the critical things, in addition to self-build, is actually the introduction, a reintroduction of all the SME builders that we lost from 2007 and 8. Apparently it's now a quarter of all the houses built are by SME, when it used to be two-thirds.
In 1988 it was indeed two-thirds. And of course, if you increase the regulation and you make it more difficult to get a hold of land, it's the SMEs who are going to go, because only the big firms with the big balance sheets can actually afford to do it. And it's a very risky enterprise. And actually local planning authorities prefer dealing with a small number of large companies because it's easier for them. And that's one of the other things we have to change. I'm accused of wanting everyone to learn how to be a builder and build their own house. It's got nothing to do with doing it yourself. It's very important to stress this. What it's got to do with is self-commissioning, giving the customer more power. I'm going to be briefing the Minister next week on the terms of the Self-Build and Custom House Building Act, which commenced now 3 years ago in April 2016, and the way in which it was augmented successfully by the Housing and Planning Act 2016, so that now the more people are on a local register, the greater the legal obligation on a council to provide suitable planning permissions. But it's important to say, in the limited time available, that the point about having individuals and associations of individuals under the terms of the legislation is that it could apply to anybody. It could apply to school governors who wish to use the provision of a service plot of land as a recruitment and retention tool. It could apply to local social services directors trying to recruit social work managers in difficult parts of the country where it's difficult to find the right calibre of social workers. It could be used by NHS trusts trying to accommodate staff, whether young junior doctors or paramedical staff or ambulance staff and so on. It could be used by a local army commander trying to retain that very expensively trained staff sergeant with 20 years' experience. It could be used by the Royal British Legion or other veterans groups trying to accommodate veterans. It could be used by probationers and ex-offenders trying to make sure that ex-offenders, when they come out of prison, have accommodation that is not the drug dealer's sofa. It could be used by the homeless themselves. I have seen just outside Berlin in Potsdam single mums building, homeless single mums building their own accommodation for an affordable rent, which brings me to my next point, that it has nothing to do with tenure. You can use self-build and custom house building both for private ownership and for all kinds of affordable accommodation models, including mutual housing cooperatives and various other types of social landlord. I'm very keen to keep my remarks brief Madam Deputy Speaker, but I just want to say a few things to the Minister in terms of what I think the task force, the Right to Build task force, which I've been involved with for some years, is now looking for. We had £350,000 of funding from the Nationwide Building Society, with which we can evidence an additional 6,000 to 9,000 houses added to the pipeline in the last 3 years. If we could do that with £350,000, Madam Deputy Speaker, think what we could do with some serious money. I'd like to see the department take on for the funding for that, but also as part of a Right to Build team installed inside Homes England with the task of facilitating the delivery of service plots, of buying land, working with local authorities and other public sector partners on public sector land for a range of client groups, especially the young and those who've been most marginalised, but actually reaching out to anybody who wants to get a service plot, so that we reach a point where you can go to the plot shop in your hometown and to your local town hall and find a plot of land as easily as you can in the Netherlands, where I've seen it done. The other thing we've got to do is put Help to Build on a level playing field with Help to Buy. The government is planning currently to spend £22,000 million on Help to Buy, subsidising demand, when what we should be doing is subsidising supply. If you want more of something, subsidise it and you get more of that. I know from many people I've spoken to, including Treasury ministers, there is a desire to do something about Help to Buy and its growing cost. The obvious thing to do is to wean people off Help to Buy, a subsidy for demand, and wean them onto a subsidy for supply, thus increasing supply. We have to remove the regulations that currently allow local authorities to charge, and most don't, but Camden and Islington councils charge £350 to be on the register each year, and you don't get any guarantee of a plot for that. That should be revoked. I did say this to Gavin Barwell when the regulations were introduced. I wasn't put on the committee for some reason, even though it was my own private member's bill that became the Act, but I went along anyway and spoke, and he did say on the record, and I can show this to the Minister, that if it proved a problem, he would take a look at it. Now, he's no longer the Minister, but the government was committed to taking a look at it. I can tell the Minister it has become an issue, and we should now revoke those regulations. It's supposed to recover the cost, but actually the cost of keeping a register can be done in an exercise book in a drawer. It can be done on a spreadsheet. The cost of doing it is really very, very small. The other thing we need to do is a series of specific planning reforms, particularly allowing exception sites where councils aren't fulfilling their legal obligations. We need to make it clear that the NPPF has a presumption in favour of sustainable development in circumstances where councils fail to meet their duties under the legislation, irrespective of whether or not there's a 5-year land supply in terms of providing service plots. We need to introduce changes to the planning system which provide greater predictability to reduce the planning risk, for example, through the compulsory use of form-based codes or through local development orders. And we need to take forward the proposals in the White Paper to facilitate land pooling, which has worked very, very successfully in Germany and elsewhere on the continent. We do have a broken system. Doing more of the same won't produce a different result. We've got to think differently, and we've got to do differently, and I encourage the Minister to take that responsibility seriously.
Sir George Harth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for South Norfolk, who made a typically thoughtful and interesting contribution to the debate on housing. And I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend for Mitcham and Morden for the survey she made of the state of the market and some of the negative aspects of it that we need to address. And I think anybody who comes to read her speech in Hansard tomorrow or at some later point will consider some of the companies that she named in her speech to be a roll call of disrepute. On that theme, Madam Deputy Speaker, I wrote to the Chief Executive of Redrow, the developer, about the Leasehold scandal following conversations with concerned residents in Summerhill Park in my constituency. Summerhill Park has over 455 houses and 70 flats, and there's a two-tier system of ground rents in operation. Residents who purchased their property earlier in the development pay ground rents of £150 a year, and those who purchased homes in the later phases, £250 a year. Now, my constituents want to be enfranchised. They want to purchase their freeholds and are willing to pay a fair price. They believe, and I agree with them, that a fair price would be 10 times the annual ground rent, which they think is fair and reasonable and they're willing to pay. Redrow, however, are asking for 26 times the annual ground rent, which frankly I think is unfair and unreasonable. And of course, in the light of the government's reform proposals and the Law Commissioner's ongoing work on leasehold reform, I approached Redrow to arrange a meeting with them to discuss the residents' ideas further. The Redrow contend, in their response, that the lease agreements are fair and transparent, something my constituents strongly disagree with, and I strongly share that disagreement. The business model is considered by many, including, I'm sure the Minister will confirm when she comes to speak later, the government, as being both unreasonable and unjustifiable. The offer of giving residents the opportunity to purchase a freehold at a fixed price of 26 times the annual ground rent is not, in my view, and I hope in the government's, not a reasonable or fair thing to do. In response to my letter, Redrow say, and I quote, "It would be inappropriate to move away from the practice that has been adopted over the last 2 years, with all Redrow households, including those who've already acquired their freehold at Summerhill Park." So I wrote back and said, well, I didn't agree with that, and I would still like a meeting. Surprise, surprise, they said, and I quote, "There is little point in a meeting." Now, all members of this House have a reasonable expectation that any organisation, company, private sector or in the public sector, if the MP requests a meeting to discuss an issue that is of concern in their constituency, that they will get a meeting. And yet Redrow arrogantly, not arrogantly to me, but arrogantly to the people I represent, have declined to hold such a meeting. And I deplore that, and I hope others will join me in doing so. It is, as I conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, unjustified and unfair, and I fail to see how pressing on with that policy is either reasonable or acceptable. Redrow are doing it simply because they can, and they're doing it because they can continue to make money out of residents who I represent in this House. The leasehold scandal has caused a great deal of distress for home buyers across England, and particularly in the northwest of England, with many home buyers being trapped in their current properties, some unable to afford to purchase the freehold, and others even unable to sell their property. Redrow are not unique in this. Other developers are just as much involved in that scandal. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I have a situation in the Winnington part of my constituency in Weaver Vale. A resident of mine, Emily Martin and many there, they are caught in this trap of leasehold. Yet over the road, in terms of the next phase, people have actually benefited from the reforms that we in here have campaigned for. The properties then become unsellable.
And that even adds to the unfairness of it. I was concluding the point I was making by saying that, you know, they're not unique in this, and I think all these companies need to look at themselves and the business model they're adopting and look at the ethics that are involved in it. I will conclude by asking the Minister 3 questions. First of all, can I invite her to join me in condemning Redrow and others who are still involved in this practice? And will she agree that the freehold purchase cost of 10 times the ground rent is fair and reasonable, whereas 26 times is sheer daylight robbery? And finally, will she agree that it is now desperately important that we have legislation to curtail the naked greed of those developers engaged in this disreputable practice?
Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I begin by congratulating the Minister and saying it's very good to see her in her place at the dispatch box. Madam Deputy Speaker, the house building market in the United Kingdom is a highly oligopolistic market dominated by very few, very large players, some of whom are extremely unresponsive to the needs of local communities, as the Honourable Lady laid out so well in her speech. They can have an adverse impact long-term on communities but they can also have an adverse impact in the short term whilst their houses are being built. And we had an example of this in Rayleigh on Monday morning. The schools came back, so clearly the traffic increases. But it was massively exacerbated by 3 contraflows, all in operation at the same time on 3 different housing developments. Barrett David Wilson at Hullbridge, where a nearby key road called Watery Lane has been closed for many weeks because of their works. Countryside at Rorath Lane in Rayleigh, where they have a contraflow in place, and Silver City, a lesser-known, smaller developer who had a contraflow on the London Road in Rayleigh. The cumulative effect, made worse by a road traffic accident that morning, was that the town effectively was gridlocked, and many of my constituents were extremely frustrated as they were simply trying to get to work. I have remonstrated with the County Council's Highways Department for granting permits to work on the highway to all of these developers at the same time. They have a strategic overview of the of the highways network, and I think they should look at that again. I've also contacted all of the developers directly, Madam Deputy Speaker, and encouraged them to get this work done as fast as possible and then get out of the way. And the response has been instructive. The smallest, Silver City, have promised that they will be finished by the end of the week and they'll be off the highway network. Countryside, an Essex-based developer, have said that they will no longer operate their contraflow in the morning and evening rush hour, thus considerably easing the congestion. Barrett David Wilson, the major national house builder, have been the least responsive of all. They've been on site since February, and my constituents in Hullbridge are just about sick and tired of it. Their chief executive, as the honourable lady has pointed out, Mr David Thomas, is on to a nice little earner. According to their 2018 annual report, he earned a total package of just shy of £3 million, some 20 times the salary the Prime Minister earns for the responsibility of running the country. I suspect that Mr David Thomas couldn't find Hullbridge in my constituency with a tom-tom. Barrett David Wilson have now, under pressure, contemplated extending the hours of their work to try and finish the job, but they still won't give me a firm date of when their works will be completed, Watery Lane can be reopened, and they will get out of the way. In short, Madam Deputy Speaker, they are a bad neighbour in my constituency, and I think it's about time this large, unresponsive, uncaring national house builder, run by a fat cat on £3 million a year, were held to account. My constituents deserve better than this, and these developers should put more people on the job, get the job done quicker, and get off the roadway. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're tight for time. In the last minute, I want to mention Sanctuary Housing, the largest housing association in my constituency. I had an adjournment debate on the 18th of July about what's wrong with them, so I shan't reiterate it all now, Madam Deputy Speaker. Suffice to say, I had a meeting with their chief executive, Mr Craig Bull, and their outgoing chairman yesterday, in fact, Mr Jonathan Lander. It was a deeply unsatisfactory meeting. They basically promised to build 50 affordable houses a year. They got nowhere near it. They had no clear plan or strategy to achieve the target. I'm afraid the outgoing chairman of the board clearly didn't take the meeting seriously. In fact, his attitude was patronising. If he said, "I hear what you say, Mr Francois," one more time, I think I would have screamed. There is a governance issue at Sanctuary. They are badly run, badly governed. They are not properly accountable to the tenants that they serve. It's why they were slated by dispatches a few months ago. Minister, my plea to you is we need tighter regulation of the registered social landlords market. Some of these are very large organisations indeed. They're not properly regulated by the government, and Sanctuary are most certainly not properly regulated by their rather useless board.
Well said.
Thank you. We really do need to keep aiming for the 5 minutes now, because I'm sure that people will want to hear what the Minister has to say. She's been asked many questions and the answers must be heard too. Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are in the grip of a major housing crisis. I can just remember, you won't be able to, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I can just remember Cathy Come Home and the determination of our predecessors in the 1960s, picking up some of the points my honourable friend made in her excellent speech opening this debate, the determination that the lives of families should not be destroyed by housing misery. And today they are being destroyed again. And one day, I hope sooner rather than later, there will have to be, again, a major national programme of council house building to give those families a chance. Last month, Madam Deputy Speaker, I had the privilege of hosting in my constituency a visit by members of the Archbishop of Canterbury's Housing Commission. We had faith in the city in the 1980s, unemployment and the future of work in the 1990s, both church reports which caught the mood of the times and which profoundly influenced the policies of governments. And I hope the Archbishop's Housing Commission report will do the same when it is published. We visited in my constituency a family, mum, dad, young son, living essentially in one room in a ramshackle property above East Ham High Street with serious damp, a rat infestation. They'd been there for 5 years. Both of the couple had been employed, were working in the NHS, but recently, tragically, they'd had a second child had been born and then very soon died, probably because of the conditions in the home. That's how it is for thousands of people. One of the Commission members emailed after the visit and commented quite rightly that our society should not tolerate people having to live in conditions like that. I was delighted to take the Commission members to the Didsbury site where the council's own, this is Newham Council owned developer Red Door Ventures, set up in 2014, is building new homes on council land previously occupied by a community centre, and what Red Doors is committed to is building homes 50% for social rent, 50% at market rent, and they've got plans to build hundreds of homes over the next few years, and I hope thousands before too long as well. After World War II, social housing, as my honourable friend has reminded the House already, was being built at a rate of well over 100,000 a year. The crisis today is just as bad as it was then. We need the scale of ambition to deliver a programme like that again, and there is absolutely no time to lose.
Yeah. Brilliant. Andrew Lewer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before I contribute to this debate, I'll just draw members' attention to the entry in the Register of Interests and thank the Honourable Lady for calling this debate. This topic's one of the core areas I've spent much of my working life taking an interest in, and it has, after now becoming a Member of Parliament, continued to be a passion of mine. I've been involved in the housing sector ever since I served as a member of a planning committee for 12 years, and then as leader of Derbyshire County Council, and also as a director of a housing association. And in my role as an MP, I sit on the Housing Communities Local Government Select Committee, but I also act as the chairman of the all-party parliamentary group for small and medium-sized house builders. And in both roles, I've had the pleasure of working with people from across the private and social housing sectors. And I'd especially like to mention my honourable friend, the member for South Norfolk, in this for the fantastic work and progress he's made in championing self-build homes, and I hope he has continuing success in the area. Another area of success can be seen in the excellent work of Northampton Partnership Homes in my constituency. Chairman David Latham and Chief Executive Mike Kay have laid out ambitious plans for the future of social housing and tackling homelessness in the constituency. But this requires national support from the government and local support to get their plans advanced. I've been encouraged by the government's commitment of £1.2 billion in funding to tackle homelessness through to 2020, and of course by the introduction of the Homelessness Reduction Act. I know that's something that is being hugely beneficial in Northampton, hoping that it can get people back on their feet with a roof over their head. Is there more to do? Well, of course there is, and I look forward to hearing about that from my right honourable friend. I was pleased to meet with Sir Edward Lister in his then capacity as chairman of Homes England at my all-party group meeting recently. I was thoroughly impressed by what he said, and I was encouraged by the approach that he'd been taking, because it felt like there's a shift and a change of culture at Homes England, or at least the start of a shift. This change needs to be seen primarily in money allocated by ministers going where it's needed most, and by SME house builders getting that access. The sector does not feel that it's anywhere near as straightforward yet as it should be for SMEs in particular. I'm encouraged by the steps and the commitments the government's already taken in this area, but I hope that my very good and right honourable friend will make reference to and address how money from Homes England will get to the private and the social sectors, but also to the shared ownership housing sector, a sector with a lot more potential, in my view, than it has yet been able to realise. Thank you.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Week in, week out, housing problems are the #1 issue in my constituency surgeries, whether that be lack of affordable housing, poor living conditions, homelessness, or landlords not acting to rectify problems. And we should not forget, at the heart of this debate are real people facing very real difficulties, because over the last 9 years, government have failed to act to tackle the housing crisis. I am getting too many people coming to see me who are sleeping on couches, in tents, in cars. It is becoming far too regular situation in my surgeries, and it is an absolute disgrace. And since government have come to power, rents have become increasingly unaffordable, with private renters spending on average 41% of their household income on rent. Shelter report a third of low-income renters are struggling to the extent that they have to borrow money to pay their rent and keep a roof over their heads. In those circumstances, putting money aside to save for a deposit so they can eventually own their own home is completely unrealistic. There is a massive job ahead of us to replenish the depleted housing stock in this country, and I'm pleased to see that after many years of stagnation, there is now significant house building in my constituency, particularly on brownfield sites. But very few of these have affordable housing in them, or as I would like to call it, council housing. That is because permissions were all granted some time ago, and the developers have used rules brought out under the coalition government to plead poverty and tell us the requirement to build affordable homes means they cannot maintain their 20% profit margins. As a result, there is no affordable housing being built on just about every private development in my constituency. Most developers sought release from these obligations 4 or 5 years ago, but have only started building in the last couple of years. So it's actually quite clear the affordable housing requirements were not what was stopping them. It was greed. And as my honourable friend, the member for Mitcham and Morden, set out, it certainly hasn't harmed their profit margins. And it is actually greed, Madam Deputy Speaker, that has poisoned many of the public's opinion of the house building industry as a result of the leasehold scandal. As the Housing Communities and Local Government Select Committee Chair, the Honourable Member for Sheffield South East, said about the voluntary scheme developers introduced to deal with some of the injustices of the scandal, he said, given the evidence we heard from leaseholders during our inquiry, we know it will be difficult for them to trust developers and freeholders to deliver on such pledges. The only way that trust can be rebuilt is for there to be a full, independent public inquiry to get to the root of the issues. How do developers first dreamt up the business model of commoditising people's homes? How the lawyers drew up the onerous terms? How the sales staff presented or didn't present these leases? How the conveyancers, the surveyors and the lenders all missed the implications of them? And now how the government's help to buy cash propped up the whole scam. The news this week that Persimmon have reached out an out-of-court settlement on an estate in Cardiff, as I mentioned earlier on, by giving the homeowners their freeholds and actually repaying the ground rent is very welcome. But unfortunately, it is one estate in one city and one developer. There must be scores of identical scenarios around the country where the developers have not been forced to come to the table, so a proper PPI-style compensation scheme is vital. As I've said in the past, this is the PPI of the house building industry, and it does now need to be treated as such. The admission from Persimmon that people did not know what they were buying should flag up huge alarm bells for every developer involved in the leasehold that time is actually running out for them to put this right. The National Leasehold Campaign have this week written to all those developers involved in the scam to ask for their freeholds back. They should do it now and start to rebuild some trust. And as we know from the profit margins that we've heard, they can well afford to do it. And the fact that they're still building homes now on estates where there's no leasehold now, but actually some of the other people who bought them a year or two ago are still in leasehold properties is an absolute injustice and scandal, and it needs to be ended. So it really is now time, Madam Deputy Speaker, to have some real action from government so that those already trapped in these unfair leases can expect to be released from them. We agree, I think we all agree that it's unfair, it's a significant injustice, but what are we actually going to do to force these developers to put things right? There are plenty of ideas out there about how we can do that. For those already stuck with these existing onerous, unfair leases. And I know the government may have lost control of the chamber, but if they were to come forward with proposals along the lines I set out in my private member's bill, for example, or indeed my party's own proposals, there is no doubt there would be more than enough support on both benches to get something on the statute book that would bring real, tangible change to help these people and get many of the thousands stuck in these toxic leases free of that obligation at last. So let's make some real difference to people's lives. Let's pass these laws and let's actually build the homes that we need to get this country moving again.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd also like to thank the previous speakers. Excellent speech from my colleague on leasehold issues, my colleague from Ellesmere Port and Neston. As ever, he's such an expert because he has such a problem in his area, but I know that is not unique, and we have some of the same areas in London in flatted developments. And I'd also like to thank my colleague from Mitcham and Mordham for the excellent work she's been doing on this important issue and for bringing this debate today. And I'm not sure if it's a relief or not to be discussing something other than Brexit, but it is as much, if not more, of a crisis, and certainly for those that are affected. Now, in my maiden speech, I referred to my forebearers who recognised the importance of good quality housing for people's well-being lives, and I have to say their productivity in their factory, and my forebearers built good quality, affordable housing until the state took on that responsibility, and from the 40s onwards, governments of all persuasions, both persuasions, built tens of thousands of council homes a year to ensure that British people were adequately were housed. But we have been walking away from that in the last 10 or more years. For most of my political life, I was a councillor in Hounslow, and even in outer London, until about 10 years ago, a family on an ordinary income could afford to buy their own home, so they weren't needing social rented housing. They didn't put additional pressure on the housing, on council housing. But since housing prices have increased, you need a household income of 72,000 in Hounslow to buy even a two-bedroom flat, and yet the average household income is 40,000. We need 1.2 million new council and social rented homes in this country, because that is the numbers of households on the housing needs register, and that doesn't count the people who are not disabled, who are working age adults, who are having to rent. The numbers of people in that category renting has gone up 100% in just over 10 years. The right to buy crisis, the right to buy has meant that most councils are, even those building housing, like Hounslow's building about 400 new council homes a year, but the right to buys mean they're losing them faster than they're building new council homes. And of course, the right to buy homes are often becoming private rented at 3 times the council rent levels. Now, of course, we need house builders to be on our side, and as others have mentioned today and said so eloquently, they they need to address this leasehold issue. They need to take also responsibility for the shocking faults in many new build properties. There is a variety between developers, and they cannot hide behind the fact that there is a skill shortage, but there is a skill shortage and they need to take responsibility for it. But so does the government, because much of the skill shortage in construction is as a result of the large proportion of our construction workforce are EU nationals, and many of them are leaving or are no longer coming in the same numbers because of the uncertainty that has been mentioned many times in this chamber. They do not feel welcome. They don't have security as workers in this country. Now, I'm sure that the Minister is going to respond with warm and hopeful words, as ever they do, and the new government may even have an intention of doing something significant about the housing crisis, though I suspect they won't be around long enough to actually implement anything. But I can advise them not to fall into the problems of some of the previous ministers, the risks of unintended consequences of poorly thought out policies. I'll just cover two of them. Let's have no more schemes that just give discounts to those who could afford to buy anyway, such as the Help to Buy scheme. And let's not rush through planning changes, such as the permitted rights one, which has built the appalling chicken coops in old factories and offices that my honourable friend from Mitcham and Morden mentioned earlier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for Mitcham and Morden for securing this debate through the Backbench Business Committee, and she's right to highlight the issues she did. Surely in this world of inequality, individuals shouldn't be lining their own pockets with millions of pounds in bonuses off the back of taxpayers' money. Our focus needs to be on all of our people, not just the few. Others raised the issue of the leasehold, and I would invite the Minister to adopt our approach to leaseholds and solve the crisis that way. Madam Deputy Speaker, a home is at the heart of our lives. It's the foundation on which we grow up and we raise our families. It's the bedrock for our dreams and our aspirations. It helps us belong and shapes who we are and what we do. Yet, as others have said, we've a housing crisis in our country. We all know it, but successive ministers seem to have had little motivation to do anything about it. There's been a steady rise in homelessness, a steady rise in rough sleeping, a steady rise in hidden homelessness. People or families who are considered homeless but whose situation is not visible either on the streets or in official statistics. Those forced into the world of sofa surfing, living in makeshift rooms, in overcrowded dwellings, or maybe even in a car. And those things are highlighted by my honourable friend, the member for Ellesmere Port and Neston. That's not a situation fit for 21st century Britain. When we left office, housing was at the heart of our decision making. We had just pulled the country back from the cliff edge of the global recession. We had just switched funding from other departments to deliver the biggest investment in social housing in a generation. And we just protected people's homes with Labour's mortgage rescue scheme, which, along with other actions, meant that repossessions were over a third lower than in 1991, when Tory inaction led to 75,000 homes being repossessed. And over the whole 13 years Labour spent in power, home ownership soared. Since then, the number of home-owning households has fallen under the Tories. Under Labour, the number rose by over 1 million. House building grew. We built almost 2 million homes. After years of high homelessness under the Tories, Labour cut it by 62%, and we brought over 1 million homes up to standard as part of our Decent Homes programme. But since 2010, Madam Deputy Speaker, the number of new social rented homes has fallen by over 95%, and we're now building 30,000 fewer socially rented homes each year. House building still hasn't recovered to the level it was before the global financial crisis. The overall level of home ownership has fallen since 2010 from 67% to 64% last year. Average private rents have risen by £1,900 a year. And something that should shame us all. In the 6th biggest economy in the world, we've seen rough sleeping more than double over the last 9 years. After nearly a decade of failure, it's clear that the Conservatives have no credible plan to build the number of homes we need. Labour will draw a line under the failure of the past and put building new homes at the heart of government. For the first time ever, a Labour government will establish a fully fledged Department for Housing. Ministers will be challenged at each and every step by a new OBR-style Office for Housing Delivery, an independent auditor of house building projections, delivery plans and progress against government targets. We will set the new Department for Housing a target of building at least 1 million homes, genuinely affordable homes in England over 10 years, including a major council house building programme. We will bring forward more land for development at a lower price by setting a new role for the Homes and Communities Agency and the government's main housing delivery body. And we will protect the Green Belt. We'll introduce a new revolutionary type of housing, first buy homes, with housing costs for new build homes benchmarked at 1/3 of local average incomes, so homes are priced at what local people can afford, not what makes developers the most money. And we'll also introduce a tough first dibs rule on new housing developments to give local people the confidence that homes built in their area can be for them and their families. Developers will be forced to market new homes to local first-time buyers first, not to overseas buyers or those with no connection to the area. And we'll act on those 750,000 empty plots sitting there doing nothing and bring them into use. Now, some may question what exactly we can do to tackle homelessness. Last week I visited St Mungo's and learned about the initiatives they have to help reduce the impact of homelessness, including No Second Night Out. I also visited AKT, which was formerly the Albert Kennedy Trust, and heard directly from some young LGBT people who have experienced homelessness and what housing support they need. Organisations such as St Mungo's and AKT do excellent work in supporting people who need help, and they truly do set the example of what can be achieved with vision and passion. Any government could learn very much from both organisations. Ultimately, Madam Deputy Speaker, it comes back to having the available housing stock. We cannot provide people with decent, affordable homes if we simply do not have the stock. We need to build and build fast, and we can't compromise on quality either, nor affordability. It means very little for thousands of new homes to go up in an area if the people who reside in that area cannot afford them. Rent costs shouldn't account for 2/3 of tenants' income. And social housing is where we must focus to address this housing crisis. Labour have already committed to stop the sell-off of 50,000 social rented homes a year by suspending the right to buy, and to transform the planning system with a new duty to deliver affordable homes to make more land available more cheaply. Councils aren't adequately staffed to oversee planning applications. The industry doesn't have the skills and innovation to deliver what we need. We will ensure that both councils and the industry have what they need. Madam Deputy Speaker, everybody should have a safe place that they can call home, but it's so often not the case. You may be a young person who cannot return to your family home because you're at risk of harm. You may be an older person who cannot safely go upstairs and therefore need a different type of accommodation. Or you may be a survivor of domestic violence who needs somewhere safe to rebuild their life. Or you may be a family sleeping in a car because the car is cleaner and perhaps safer than temporary accommodation. Perhaps maybe some of those destroyed families my honourable friend, the member for East Ham, referred to. Successive Tory governments, Madam Deputy Speaker, have failed all of these people. It's time we had a Labour government with housing front and centre, putting right the failures and sorting out the crisis so many face today. As my honourable friend from Mitcham and Morden said, we've done it before and we will do it again.
Secretary of State, Esther McVick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I want to say, first off, thank you very much indeed for the Honourable Lady from Mitcham Morden for bringing this debate to the floor of the House and to everybody who's added to it. And across the floor, I think there has been much agreement in what we'd like to see happen and, more importantly, what we do not like the look of and what we all agree is not the way forward. Nobody can agree at some of these absolutely exorbitant pay packets that people have got. None of us can agree with that. And we will all agree that the market there is not working. I think those were the Honourable Lady's words, the market isn't working, and that's right, it's not. We might have different ways of resolving that, but we'd say if there's not enough houses in the market, then it's not working. And when you put in various schemes, various implementation schemes, they should be for a short period of time until we've got more of those houses in the market. And that is what we are doing, because it has been a scandal how fewer houses have been built decade after decade, but we are turning that round. So let's look at some of those figures of what have been happening. To that end, we have delivered over 1.3 million new homes since 2010, and that's including over 430,000 affordable homes. And we've delivered over 220,000 additional homes in the latest year to date. That's the highest level in all but one of the last 31 years. And latest indicators show that we are on track to meet our 2015 manifesto commitment to add 1 million more homes by 2020. Alongside that, because people talked about homelessness, I think they'll be heartened to hear that for the first time since 2010, the annual rough sleeping statistics saw a decrease in the number of those sleeping rough. This reflects the substantial investment this government has now put in and support over the last few years. But what we want to see going forward are the right houses being built. The fact that there is choice who is building those houses, that we have an SME market, not just a market full of the top 4, top 5 building sector, but that we, as a Conservative government, bring back those many small SMEs, 30% of which were lost during the financial crash, and they never came back. We want those businesses back, and more importantly, as my friend said before, we want to have the right to build. We want to be able to make sure that it's not just a few companies building thousands of homes, but actually there could be thousands of individuals making their own homes. That's what we're about, choice and opportunity as we go forward. And what we said we'd do is 300,000 homes by the mid-2020s. The ambition of myself and of a Conservative Party is there, and how do we go about doing it? I've said we have been delivering more each year, but what we want to do is bring together a centre of excellence for construction and engineering in the north of the country. We want to have a global leader for construction and engineering, bringing forth those technological solutions that we're talking about, modern methods of construction, bringing forward environmental additions to that housing market. These are the things we want to do. But I will pick up on some of the things we certainly don't want that many members talked about. And that was, and I do want to work with my friend from the member for Knowsley and for Ellesmere Port and Neston and Brentworth and Isleworth and Northamptonshire South. We don't want to see the misuse of leaseholds. We don't want to see the exorbitant costs that people are paying. Now, we have brought a consultation forward. We are going to stop the misuse and bad practices in that field, but I do think that is something that we can work on together from both sides of the House, because that is something we shouldn't have, we don't want to have, and we've already started on that course to make sure it doesn't happen.
I'm very grateful to that response from the Right Honourable Lady. Will she therefore join me in condemning companies like Redrow for being unwilling to even discuss what residents want?
Secretary of State.
Companies and businesses should work towards what their purchasers and their customers want. Therefore, they should be listening if they want to be the best company they can possibly be. So, of course, they should be listening. But equally, we are listening as members of Parliament. We have all shone the light now on that bad practice, and we will be taking that forward. We're also looking at what housing associations are doing, as my honourable friend from Rayleigh and Whitford brought forward, what is happening with sanctuary homes. And to that effect, we've got a green paper that is setting out 5 principles which will underpin a new, fairer deal for social housing residents: a safe and decent home, swift and effective resolution of disputes, empowering residents and ensuring their voices are heard. Because really, although we talked about, I will in just 1 second, because really, although we talk about the industry, we really want to support the people who are living in those houses. We're talking about homes, we're talking about safety, we're talking about security. We don't want people in temporary accommodation. We don't want people who are homeless. We want them in permanent accommodation, and that can only be brought about by fixing the market, by making sure we build more homes, which is what we're doing. I will indeed give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. Weaver Vale Housing Trust, which is, it covers my area, certainly as well as the Minister's area. They've got real concerns about the lack of clarity funding going forward. You spoke about social housing there, because the key is to build more social and affordable housing. There isn't that clarity there at the moment, so we're not getting the building the numbers that we need.
Spending review didn't help yesterday.
We will be, and we are building more affordable homes. We've put in significant billions of pounds for affordable homes, and we've also removed the cap for councils to be able to build homes too. And that's what we've got to do. And as a party that believes in choice, for somebody who comes from a council house, for somebody who believes in the right to buy at the time in the 1980s, to make sure that you could be in charge of your own home, ones that weren't being repaired properly, that we bought them, we looked after them, and now we have to make sure we're building more so there is a virtuous cycle, so there are more homes. But we are a nation that believes in home ownership, and what we need to do is enable people to have their own homes. When you know 80% of people want their own, what are we doing? And it is by an array of choice, an array of support, and quite rightly, as my friend from South Norfolk talked about, the ability for individuals to build their own homes. I will indeed give way.
I'm grateful to this for giving way. Home ownership under the Tories in the last 9 years has dropped from 67 to 64%. How's she going to put it right?
As through an array of support, and what obviously I've been heartened by is the fact that first-time ownerships for the first time in 11 years has increased. People are getting on that housing ladder. We've helped over 500,000 people through Help to Buy and Right to Buy, and that's what we intend to continue to do.
Can I draw my right honourable friend's attention to the housing benefit budget? £25 billion a year, 3% of all public spending, $250 billion over the next 10 years, $500 billion over the last 20 years or so. Her permanent secretary in her former department, Peter Schofield, used to be the Director General of Communities in MHCLG, and he came with us to Berlin looking at more creative and innovative ways of delivering housing. Can I suggest she talks to DWP about trying to use some of that money, the housing benefit budget, which is currently just propping up private landlords and admittedly helping some housing associations, but propping up private landlords, that we use some of that for capital investment in greater quantity and quality of housing stock?
Well, my honourable friend will not be surprised to hear that that is exactly what we intend to do, is how do we enable people to get on the housing ladder, to be a home owner in an array of homes that they would like, that they would need, and how do we best use housing benefits to enable that too. And as I said, we have built more homes in this last year than in every one of the last 31 years. We are correcting a market that has been undeniably not supported for the last 31 years. We are getting it right. We've built more houses where we are seeing, as I said, this misuse of leaseholds we will be getting rid of, and how we support people going forward is exactly what we will be doing with an array of opportunities. I will indeed give way.
Secretary of State for giving way. But with due respect to her, I think the honourable gentleman opposite was talking about the housing benefit bill, which is not something that people who can buy their own homes, that isn't relevant. What I think the honourable gentleman was saying is that money is far better spent on building affordable social rent homes for people who will never be able to buy their own home. And meanwhile, the rent to buy issue has in itself, the help to buy programme has actually, all it's done has increased the price of flats in London.
I did understand what the gentleman was talking about, the 24 billion that is going into housing benefit. How do we best use that to help build more homes, which could be part of the social homes or the council homes? I understand that, but at the same time, what we've got to make sure is that more people can get on the housing ladder. Now, we are at the start of building 300,000 homes a year. So that's not just about the homes, that's not just about the house, that's about reshaping an industry. But at the same time, we want to be a global centre, a visionary centre with a centre of expertise in building, because think about all the jobs that will do if we have together got the commitment to do that. And that is why we'll have a centre of excellence in the north of England looking at the best ways forward for construction and engineering. And that is what a determined Conservative Party is going to do: build those houses, the right houses, champion home ownership, and make a centre for excellence for anyone.
Siobhan McDonagh.
Can I thank everybody who's contributed to this debate? Can I ask everybody, in just my few seconds, could we ban the word affordable when it comes to housing? Affordable means 80% of market rent. The vast proportion of our constituents could never afford 80% of a market rent. Let's talk about social housing rent, let's talk about owner occupation, but let us clearly address what is affordable, because affordable is not affordable.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper. As may is that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.